Start in a few minutes. The picture you see on the screen is of a little town or little country in the Caribbean, Haiti. Haiti is the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere. The average per capita income in Haiti in U.S. American dollars is $1,490 per year. So compare that with how things are going here in the States, and you see they're a bit more disadvantaged than we are. This picture is from 2010. In 2010, there was a pretty massive earthquake that struck this poor nation of Haiti. And you can see that the destruction was pretty bad. Somewhere around 300,000 people lost their lives on that day and in the days following. Somewhere around 250 structures, homes, and big buildings like those. Somewhere around 250,000 structures were demolished in the time after that earthquake. And so for the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere to endure a natural disaster like this earthquake would have been absolutely destruction beyond what most of us could ever even imagine. That was in 2010. I had to go down in 2015, 5 years later, and do some mission work down there, got to go do some mission work down there. And in one of the lessons that I was charged with preaching to these folks in Haiti was what to do when bad things happen to good people. So you can imagine, I think I've told you this before, that is probably the least qualified I've ever been to preach a sermon or to teach some people about how their reaction ought to be to trying situations in life. Who in the world am I? At that point, I was like 30 years old. Who am I to go down there to these folks who have endured hardship beyond anything I've ever had to imagine? And who am I to tell them what their perspective in life ought to be? Well, so that was a difficult situation for me. But we get down there. Alicia and I went on this mission trip. And part of the place where we stayed was a children's home. And the children's home had seen some destruction as a result of this hurricane. But what I remember from that situation was they took us to this place where there was a concrete pad. And the concrete pad was intact. But there were no walls around the concrete pad. What they told us is that there were walls 5 years ago around this block of concrete, but the earthquake had torn the walls down, and in doing so, lives were lost at that children's home. And so we started asking questions about why this happened and things like that, and I'm supposed to preach a sermon about why these bad things happen and how to respond to them. But really what we found out is that happened at that children's home in that particular situation around the concrete foundation pad that's still there. The pad was okay, the foundation was fine. But a report later revealed that the building materials were the problem. It's a poor nation, and so they were cutting some corners in how they built their buildings. And the report eventually revealed that in their concrete mix, I'm not a builder or construction or anything like that, but I read the report, and the report says that in their materials, in their concrete, used way too much sand because it's cheaper, and in their structures, they did not use nearly enough steel because it's more expensive. And so you get down there and you look around at the destruction, and a lot of the foundations remain, but a lot of the things built on top of the foundation had crumbled. There's a big problem there. And it's not just a problem with Haiti. This is a problem that has happened throughout time several times. One of those happened in the ancient city of Corinth in about 164 BC. At that point, there were wars going on between ancient Greece and Corinth and Rome. And around 146 BC, Rome comes in and they decide they're going to ransack the city of Corinth. And so in part of that, they win the battle of Corinth, and then they burn the city to the ground. And so what's left in the city of Corinth in 146 BC is the foundation of all these buildings, but a lot of the structures themselves had been burned to the ground, especially the ones that were built with combustible materials, things like wood that burns up pretty easily, hay and straw that people would use for their roofs. Those were gone. What lasted were the heavier materials that they'd build with, the metals that they were using in some of their structures, or really to decorate some of their structures. Those things remained. And so when Paul writes to these people in Corinth, in 1 Corinthians 3, he uses some images in his writing that would have been very apparent to them in Corinth that may be not so apparent to us. But today, we're going to tackle these verses, and I'll be honest with you, 1 Corinthians 3, 10 through 15 are some of the more difficult passages to really find the meaning of in the whole letter. And so we're going to do our best today, but it's a picture of God's people as God's building. Now, this is pretty common in Scripture. Paul uses this idea several times of Jesus as the foundation and Jesus is the chief cornerstone that some had rejected. Jesus himself uses this illustration to close out his great Sermon on the Mount when he says, there are a couple of builders. One builds on a weak foundation of sand, pretty shoddy foundation, and his house falls in the great storm. The other person who builds on the rock, his house stands. Fools build on sandy ground, wise people build on rocks. Well, of course, we say, that's a Vacation Bible School story. We've known that since we were kids. Who in the world would build on a weak foundation? Get the foundation right, we think, and the building will stand. Whatever's built on top of the right foundation will stand the test of time, we think. That's what Jesus said anyway. That's how we read it anyway. But Paul takes it to a different level. Paul is pretty clear in saying that Christians, we're all building our lives on the foundation of Jesus Christ. That's why you woke up early today. That's why you came to church today, because you're building your life on the foundation of Jesus Christ. You wouldn't be on church or be in church on Sunday if you didn't. Right? Paul concedes that. But what Paul also says is that somebody can start with the right foundation of Jesus Christ and still not build the kind of life that the Lord intends for us to build. Here's what he says. Again, 1 Corinthians 3, verse 10. According to the grace that God's given me, like a skilled master builder, Paul says, I laid a foundation and somebody else is building upon it. Now, what he's talking about is when I came around and planted these churches, Paul said, I preached nothing to you except Christ and Him crucified. That was our sermon 2 weeks ago from chapter 2. I was determined, Paul said, to know nothing among you except Jesus and Jesus on the cross specifically. Now, Paul says, I laid that foundation of Jesus crucified, but somebody else is building upon it, and so let each one take care how he builds upon it. Just like in Haiti, just like in ancient Corinth, it's possible to have a really solid foundation, but to have some really weak construction going on top of the foundation, and those buildings are going to fall down at some point or be burned up at some point. Verse 11, he says, no one can lay a foundation other than that which is laid, which is Jesus Christ. Now, if anybody builds on the foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, and straw, each one's work will become manifest, for the day will disclose it. Let's just stop right there for a second. All right? Here's where Paul's leading us. This thought should probably lead us to some urgency in our lives, some kind of understanding about the importance of our lives and how we build our lives, but not just this blanket statement of life. All right? I'm kind of letting you off the hook, and I'm kind of letting me off the hook if I just say, the foundation of life ought to be Jesus, and you ought to build your life on the rock foundation of Jesus. Now, go live your lives. All right? Yeah, that's true. That's Bible, but it's letting us off the hook a little bit too easily, in my opinion. What we're talking about today should lead us to think about our lives, but not just blanket statement life. It should lead us to think about our choices, the decisions that we make day in and day out, because those choices become behaviors. And once I've established a behavior in my life, those behaviors that I do every day, those become habits. And the habits that I cultivate and build into my life, those become my character. And my character is what really becomes my life, right? And so it begins with a choice that becomes an action, that becomes a behavior, that becomes a habit, that becomes my character, that becomes my life. And so I think what Paul's leading us to do in 1 Corinthians 3 is to really examine what we are building into our lives. Not just to think about, am I building on the foundation of Jesus? Because you're in church on Sunday morning, of course you are. But what kind of building materials make up your choices and your actions and your habits and your behaviors and your character? That's what we're talking about. It's important, and it's especially true for the parts of our lives that we are currently hiding. And when I say hiding, I don't mean that I'm just, living some secret life behind closed doors that nobody knows about. These may be things that I'm hiding from you or from my family or from my kids or from my spouse. These could be things that I'm hiding from the church. These could be things that I'm hiding from myself if I don't want to admit what's really true about me. And so what Paul's going to do in 1 Corinthians 3 is hit on the ideas of judgment and of disclosure and of revealing, a final revealing of our lives. He's going to talk about how one day we'll all appear before the judgment seat of Christ. We'll give an account of what we've done in our lives, the parts that people know about, and the parts of our lives that nobody else knows about. And so living in light of that expectation, it should create some kind of urgency, right? If I know that at some point nothing is hidden, then it should create some kind of urgency about my choices and my decisions and my actions and behaviors, habits, and my character. It should be very clear to us how important it is to follow Jesus with all of our hearts, with all of our lives, even down to the various choices that we make. All right, so Paul begins here, verses 10, 11, 12 in 1 Corinthians 3, and he is very clear that the foundation of our lives must be Jesus. I think you know that. I think we all know that. That's why we're here today. It's very common in Scripture. Paul is adamant that the foundation of the church is Jesus. All right, this is what he says in other places when he says the head of the church is Christ, that he has all authority over the church because he bought the church. That's what he's talking about. When Paul refers to Jesus as Lord, as King, this is what he's talking about. He has all the authority. The problem with that, with understanding that Jesus is the foundation, is that Jesus can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, right? If you go ask, leave this building and go find some people and ask them their opinion of Jesus, you're probably going to get about as many opinions of Jesus as people that you ask. For some, Jesus, he's a kind gentleman who helps people. That's good. For others, he's a thorn in their flesh because he calls them to do things they don't want to do and to cut out things that they'd rather do. So he's a thorn in their flesh. A lot of people in today's world, they kind of see Jesus as an outlandish teacher, full of all kinds of foolish teachings. That's not new. They thought that in ancient Corinth when Paul writes them this letter. Maybe we see Jesus as a son of God who did a lot for us and can't wait to spend eternity with us no matter what in the world we do. Well, the problem is that none of those ideas completely grasp Paul's picture and idea of Jesus. Paul taught nothing but Jesus Christ and him crucified, the Son of God giving up his rights, emptying himself of all selfishness, and going to the cross for the benefit of the world. That's the Jesus that Paul writes about. And so when Paul writes about the foundation of the church being Jesus, that's what he has in mind. That's the Jesus he wants us to envision and picture. That's what our religion is built upon. That's what the church is built upon, and it should be the bedrock of our lives. The foundation of every choice and decision and action and behavior and habit and character that makes up our lives. Because the foundation of Jesus is in the shape of a cross. And the question that we'll have to address at some point in judgment is this: how did the life that I built line up with the foundation of the cross? That's the question. That is the question of Christianity, right? Paul says somebody came in here, it was Paul, and built this foundation of Jesus Christ crucified. It's in the shape of a cross. And the question that we've got to address in our lives is, how is the life that I'm building, my choices and decisions, how do they line up with the foundation of a cross? My actions and behaviors, the habits that I'm building into my life, the character that I'm reaping out of those habits, how does it line up on the foundation of a cross? That's the issue. Does it line up? Is it cross-shaped? That's what we talked about 2 weeks ago. It's not just Jesus as the foundation. It's for Paul, Jesus and him crucified. And so every choice, every decision ends up in an action. And actions become behaviors, and behaviors become habits, and habits are what make up our lives. In the end, what Paul writes is that those are the things that will be disclosed. Every idle word that we speak, the actions that are second nature, that have become second nature to us, those are the things that we'll have to deal with at some point. I want you to see what he does in verse 13. Well, verse 12, if anybody builds on the foundation, that's Jesus, with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, straw, each one's work will become manifest, for the day will disclose it, because it will be revealed by fire, and the fire will test what sort of work each one has done. Be honest with me. Scare you a little bit? Did I give you a little pause about your thoughts and your choices and your actions and your behaviors, your life? When you think about that in 1 Corinthians 3:13, in Paul's language, our life's work, every idle word, our life's work will be revealed by fire, and the fire will test our work. The things that I've hidden and the things that I've been open with, it's all disclosed. Whatever is hidden will be made known. And so what is true about us, not what we wish were true about us, not the side that looks good, and so we show it to the world, and we show it to our fellow church members, and we show it to our families, and we show it to our, not what we wish were true about us. What Paul says is that one day the truth about us will be revealed, disclosed. It's the word like for revelation. It'll be revealed. Reality, whether we are currently admitting what is true about us or not, will be revealed and disclosed. And that's what we'll have to deal with in that fire. Now, a little word on fire. In my experience in church, most of the time when we talk about fire, we're thinking pretty negatively about it. And we kind of throw out some of those passages about fire that are not so negative. Our God is a consuming fire. It's not necessarily a negative thing. We don't need to read our bias about what we've heard about fire into what Paul is saying here, because fire is not inherently bad. It can be destructive, but fire is not inherently bad. Fire is what allows us to grill steaks and to make s'mores. Fire is what allows us to eat well. The heat of a fire can consume, yes, but the heat of a fire can also purify. Whenever exposed to a fire, paper responds in one way, a rock responds in another way, and metals, steel, respond in a totally different way. One is burned up, consumed, one just gets really hot, and one is purified. These are all uses of fire, right? And so when we read about fire, let's not read our bias into it immediately. Let's be honest with the text here. In 1 Corinthians chapter 3, this figurative fire is a revealing source. It's a disclosing fire. I don't know that there are any words about punishment in 1 Corinthians chapter 3. If you see any, let me know. I just don't see that they're there. It's a revelation. It's a disclosure of who we are. It's a purifier. It's burning away. The idea is burning away the wood and the hay and the straw that we're building with, the things that have no place in our lives and no place in God's kingdom. Remember, there was a fire in Corinth in 146 BC, and that fire at the hands of the Romans was not really a punishment, it's just what they did. That fire in 146 BC did reveal what was a good building material and what was not. There was an earthquake in Haiti in 2010. It wasn't a punishment. What it did do, though, is reveal what structures were sound and what structures were made with less than stellar building materials. And so to illustrate this, that's what Paul does. He lists out 6 building materials. There's gold and silver and precious stones. Those are good. And there's wood and there's hay and there's straw. And there are differing opinions on this, but it seems to me that the best way to understand this is that Paul is saying these materials are descriptive of how we are living our lives. These building materials are descriptive of what we are building into our lives, not our blanket lives as a whole, but the choices, the behaviors, the habits, the character that I'm building into my life, everything that makes me up. Paul's idea is that one day, whatever we're building with our lives, whether it's hidden right now or not, it will be disclosed. And so Paul's challenge for them is to think about, what am I building right now? What am I building into my life that has no place in the life of a Christian or in the kingdom of God? What kind of choices am I making? What kind of behaviors am I cultivating? What kind of habits am I building into my life that I got to deal with down the road and stop, hopefully, later on down the road? What kind of destructive choices am I making in my life that do not have any place in it? What am I adding into my life that I need to purge out of my life? That's the question here in 1 Corinthians chapter 3. Not all of it's going to last. There are good ways to build in our lives, and there are bad, destructive ways to build in our lives. Anything, this is what Paul's going to say, anything that's not compatible with a crucified Jesus, that doesn't fit squarely on the foundation of a cross, has no place in the life of somebody who claims to follow Jesus. Any choice or decision or action, behavior, habit, character that does not line up with Christ and Him crucified has no place in the life of a Christian. And so what is it that we are building into our lives that has no place in the life of a Christian? Is it selfishness? Am I making choices and decisions and habits based on some root of selfishness deep in my life? Is it greed? Is it lust? Am I building a life of hypocrisy where I can really fool you into really thinking I'm good, but I'm really not deep down? Am I building anger and wrath and envy into my life? Those things have no place in the life of a Christian. They need to be burned off, burned out. Whatever we're building needs to line up with the foundation that we are building on. This is what Paul means in other places when he uses phrases like in Romans 8, conformed into the image of his Son, Jesus. It means that our lives should kind of line up with the foundation of Jesus. It's what he means when he says in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 1, to imitate God as you see Him on the cross. It means that your life, my life, it should look a little bit like Jesus' life. It's what he means when he says in 1 Corinthians 11, imitate me as I imitate Christ. It means we're trying to build a life that fits squarely on a cross-shaped foundation. That'll be a cross-shaped life. It's what Paul means in Ephesians 4 when he says that we are trying to grow up into our head, which is Christ. And so he says, we, the body of Christ, the church, we are on this journey and process of growing up into our head, which is Jesus. And that means that instead of selfishness, I'm trying to build in a certain selflessness into my choices and behaviors, actions, and habits. It means I strive not for greed, but for generosity, not for wrath, but for kindness. Not to do whatever in the world I want to do and nobody's going to tell me not to, but a certain self-control in our lives. It means that we seek truth in our lives, not the lies of hypocrisy. It means that we seek peace, not anger and wrath. It means that we're patient with one another. And it sounds like the fruit of the Spirit. Those are the things that go into a life that fits squarely and soundly on a foundation of Christ and Him crucified. So what am I building that will burn? There's also an urgency here because every choice we make is a step in the direction of the person that we are becoming. Every decision that I make is a step toward becoming the person that I'm becoming, because they lead to actions and behaviors, and those lead to habits and a certain kind of character that determines what kind of life am I going to live? What kind of life is mine going to be like? And one day I've got to give an account for that kind of life. And so the sooner that I wake up, the sooner that I admit and am honest about what is true and real about me, the better off I'll be. If I put it off and I say, well, it's just one choice, it's just one decision, it's just this one time, nobody will ever know, I'm not hurting anybody but myself, everybody else is doing it, I got all kinds of excuses, all kinds of way to rationalize these awful, dumb, destructive behaviors, and you got a list of rationalizations too. But if I put it off, and I keep doing the stuff, and I keep making the choices, and I keep cultivating the habits and creating the behaviors, if I keep doing it, then it's just going to be a little bit harder next time to stop it. But you knew that, didn't you? You've been there. We've lived it. Maybe it's not going to be a little harder to stop it next time. Maybe next time or next week or next month or next year or the next time I get around to thinking about it. Maybe it's not going to be a little harder. Maybe it's going to be a lot harder to stop doing the stuff that I should have stopped doing today. To get rid of the stuff that has no place on a foundation of Christ and Him crucified. A little bit later, when he writes another letter to the Corinthians, 2 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 5, Paul instructs them, let each one examine himself to see whether or not he is in the faith. What he means is let each one of us examine ourselves to see what kind of lives we're really building. But not the blanket statement life. That's easy. Go live a life of following Jesus. Get out there and do it. That's easy to say. It's easy to say, right, I'm going to go do that. What about let each one examine his choices? Let each one examine her decisions. Let each one of us really think about how those choices lead to actions and behaviors that will really quickly become habits in our lives. Let each one of us examine our habits to see whether or not they are cross-shaped or not. Let each one examine himself to see whether or not he is in the faith. What kind of lives are we living? An examination, I don't want to let you off too easy, okay? An examination is not just a quick glance. The word that Paul uses is the word for a jeweler who is looking deeply at a gemstone, analyzing all the little lines within it and all the angles within that one gemstone. See, I can look at a diamond and tell you it looks pretty good, right? That looks like a nice diamond. But I can't look at it and examine all the intricacies that a jeweler can. That's a serious look of things that are deep down within the jewel. And that's what Paul says. Let each one examine himself or herself. That doesn't mean just, you know what? Feel pretty good about my level of following Jesus today. Think I'll keep going. It's a little deeper than that. A little harder than that. And a little bit more serious than that. In a serious examination of our lives and of our faith, it may be painful for us. It hurts to pinpoint where I'm not living a cross-shaped life, doesn't it? It hurts to admit that, I built on the foundation of Jesus, but my life doesn't look anything like Him. It hurts to say I've been going to church for 30 years, and I'm still as greedy, envious, hypocritical as I've always been. It hurts to admit that. And so that's probably why we never get around to admitting those things. Or maybe It's that we never take a close enough look. It's painful. It's painful, kind of like a fire that discloses or reveals what may be hidden from us or what we're actively hiding from others. A fire that's going to show us where we're building our lives with wood and hay and straw. That's what Paul's saying in 1 Corinthians 3. It's tough. I wasn't looking forward to saying this to you this morning, but I don't think I can do it justice without saying it. Wherever there are choices and behaviors and habits and character in our lives that model the cross of Jesus, that's where we're building with gold and silver and precious stones on the foundation of Jesus. That's great. Hey, I hope that's what you got. And what Paul says is the fire reveals that, purifies that, tests that. But also, wherever in our lives, not the blanket statement of just our whole lives, it's a deeper look. When we examine, and wherever we find that in our choices and behaviors and habits and our character and what's become second nature to us, whether it's hidden or not, if it doesn't line up with the cross, that's where we're building with wood and hay and straw. Now, pinpointing that is painful. That's what I got to deal with in the fire. And so Paul says, now's the time to examine ourselves to see what we're building into our lives. When I think about my choices and my decisions, are they more wood, hay, and straw? Not lining up, pretty weak building materials, not really fitting with the foundation of the crucified Christ? Or when I think about those choices and decisions, do they line up? Am I making the what would Jesus do decision? When I think about my behaviors and my habits and what is second nature to me, when I think about what is second nature to me, does it fit pretty squarely on the foundation of the cross? Or is it wood, hay, and straw? When I think about what people in my family would say is second nature to me, what kind of life am I building? Am I making a life out of wood, hay, and straw? Am I making a life out of gold, silver, and precious stones? Do my choices and behaviors and habits run against the grain of the cross? Or do they line up with the image that we find of Jesus on the cross? There will be a day when nothing is hidden. It may be hidden today, and you may be doing a great job of hiding it from everybody, even yourself. But there will be a day when everything hidden and secret is made known. And the longer I put off that urgency, the harder it is to stop building with the weak materials that have no place in the life of a Christian. And so, if one day we'll have to be honest, if one day all will be revealed, why don't we just start being honest with ourselves today? Deal? Why don't we just start being honest with ourselves today and stop denying it? And stop acting like it's not there, and stop acting like everything's fine if it's really not, and stop acting like everything's just peachy if it's really sour in my life. Why? If I know that one day it will be disclosed and revealed in the fire, then why not be honest about it today? Why not start being honest with God today? Why not start being honest with ourselves today? What kind of life are you building? Choices, decisions, behaviors, habits, character, life. We're all building on the foundation of Jesus Christ. That's why you're in church on Sunday morning. But does the life that you're building fit squarely on the foundation of a crucified Christ? If it does,